In 1968, a scientist built heaven, not metaphorically. Literally, a sealed enclosure with unlimited food, unlimited water, perfect temperature, no disease, no predators, no competition for resources of any kind. Every need a living creature could have, met automatically, permanently, forever. He placed 8 mice inside and locked the lid. 5 years later, every single one of them was dead. Not from hunger, not from disease, not from anything a doctor could name or a test could detect. They died from something far harder to explain. And what happened inside that enclosure in those 5 years is one of the most disturbing things ever recorded in the history of science. The scientist was John Calhoun, an American researcher who spent his entire career obsessed with a single question that most people never think to ask. What happens to a society when nothing is hard anymore? He had been chasing that question for 20 years before Universe 25. He had built 24 earlier versions, in forest enclosures, in barns, in laboratory rooms, each one a slightly different version of paradise for rats and mice. No scarcity, no predators, no way out, and in every single one of them he had watched the same thing happen. Population explodes, then violence spikes, then mating collapses into chaos, then apathy, then extinction 24 times. The same pattern, every time. Universe 25 was meant to be the clean version, the final proof, the experiment nobody could argue with. He built it inside a federal research lab in Maryland. A 9-foot square enclosure with apartments stacked along every wall, connected by mesh tunnels running floor to ceiling. He stocked it with the healthiest mice from the National Institutes of Health breeding colony. He calculated the space could comfortably support around 3,800 animals. It would never come anywhere close to that number. For the first 104 days, almost nothing happened. The 8 founders explored. They mapped the space. They worked out territories and sleeping arrangements. Then the first litters arrived, and the population began to double every 55 days. By day 315, more than 600 mice were living inside. They climbed over each other on the ramps. They slept in piles. They jostled for space at the tops of the apartments. The enclosure was loud and crowded and alive. And this is exactly the moment everything began to fall apart. In a natural environment, when a mouse colony grows too large for its territory, the surplus animals leave. They find new ground. They establish new colonies somewhere else. Inside Universe 25, there was no somewhere else. The young males who could not claim territory had nowhere to go, no role to fill, no female to protect, no fight worth having. They began drifting toward the center of the enclosure and pooling there in listless, motionless groups. Calhoun would stand above the pen for hours watching them. They were perfectly healthy, well-fed, not injured, not sick. They just had nothing to do. When one of them was attacked by another mouse, he would not fight back. He would absorb the damage, stand up, walk a few steps, and lie down again. The aggression meant nothing to him, because there was nothing left worth defending. But not every male went quiet. A second group emerged simultaneously, frantic, indiscriminate, moving faster than any other mice in the enclosure. They forced themselves into nests. They ignored courtship rituals entirely. They refused to be stopped by dominant males. They moved through the colony like something had broken in their wiring. Both groups had the same cause. No meaningful role, 2 completely opposite responses. The females responded with their own form of withdrawal. The ones who could find no place in the collapsing social order climbed to the highest apartments and stayed there. Alone. They stopped interacting with males. They stopped reproducing entirely. They simply opted out. Meanwhile, the mothers who were still trying to raise young began failing in ways Calhoun had never documented before. Defending a nest in that environment required constant effort. The males who had originally claimed territory grew exhausted from patrolling and stopped protecting their families. The mothers were left to defend their nests alone while still nursing. They couldn't do both. They began abandoning their pups in scattered locations around the enclosure. Some stopped recognizing which pups belonged to them. Others stopped caring entirely. And in the darkest sections of the colony, mothers began killing and consuming their own offspring. In some areas, fewer than 1 in 20 newborn mice survived to weaning. Calhoun would write that by this point, the social fabric of the colony was effectively dead. The bodies were still moving. The structure that held them together as a species was gone. The pups that survived had no functional adults to learn from. They grew up watching withdrawn females, purposeless males, and mothers who barely registered their existence. They had no model of what a working life inside this place was supposed to look like. And when they matured, they became something Calhoun had never seen before. They never fought. They never tried to mate. They never engaged in any social behavior at all. They ate. They slept. They groomed themselves obsessively. Their fur was immaculate because they never got into a single altercation with another mouse. They moved through the colony as if no other animal existed in it. Calhoun named them the beautiful ones. Externally, they were the healthiest-looking mice in the entire enclosure. Internally, they were completely hollow. Their nervous systems had developed inside a world where every social role was already taken, and nothing was ever required of them. They had not chosen withdrawal. They had simply grown up in a world that made participation unnecessary, and their brains had wired accordingly. They would never reproduce. They could not socialize. They were biologically alive and functionally extinct. On day 560, the population peaked at 2,200 mice. It never went higher. The last successful exception inside Universe 25 happened on day 920. After that, no new mice were born. The colony continued to age. The beautiful ones kept grooming. The isolated females stayed in their high apartments. Violence continued in small pockets with no purpose driving it. One by one, the mice died of old age with nothing coming up behind them. On May 23, 1973, the last mouse in Universe 25 died. 4 years and 10 months after Calhoun shut the lid on his paradise. He wrote that the mice had experienced 2 deaths. The death of the spirit came first. The death of the body followed years later. When the paper was published, the world grabbed the obvious conclusion and ran with it. Comfort kills. Abundance kills. A life without struggle destroys itself. The beautiful ones became one of the most cited images of the late 20th century. Politicians used them. Religious leaders used them. Anyone who wanted to warn about modern decay found something in those mice they could point to. But that was not what Calhoun actually concluded. His real finding was sitting in the paper in his own words. The killer was not comfort. The killer was the disappearance of meaningful roles. When the population grew faster than the number of roles the colony could support, the animals with no place to fill stopped functioning, not because they were lazy, not because life was too easy, but because nothing in their environment required them to be anything. The food never ran out. The water never ran out. What ran out was purpose. And here is the part that almost nobody quotes. Calhoun was not a pessimist. He spent the rest of his career not predicting collapse but trying to prevent it. He kept building new universes. He kept adjusting variables. He was searching for the one thing he could put back into a paradise that would allow it to survive. He believed it could be done. He wrote that as physical space contracts, the only path forward is to expand into conceptual space, into ideas, into new structures, into the creation of roles that did not previously exist. He called it ideational generativity, a long phrase for something simple. The way a society survives abundance is by continuously generating new reasons for its members to be needed. The experiment ended in 1973, but the question it asked has not. You live in a world of historically unprecedented comfort, more food security, more physical safety, more access to entertainment and distraction than any generation that has ever existed. And you have probably felt at some point the particular kind of emptiness that has no obvious cause. Not hunger, not fear, not pain, just the quiet sense that nothing specifically requires you to show up today. Calhoun's mice did not choose what happened to them. The environment chose for them. The question he left open, the one he spent the rest of his life trying to answer, was whether a species intelligent enough to understand the experiment could also be intelligent enough to escape it. The mice couldn't choose. You still can.